Right, hello everybody. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm from down in the Big Smoke, company called Brookes Architects. We've been using Revit for about 10 years now, and I run a small team, 3 people, just about to grow to 4, and we do some quite big projects. One is 120 flats over 4 buildings. Another one, we've got a church with 32 flats above it, and we've just started another project, a bit smaller, about 40 odd flats over 3 buildings. But we've also done a few planning jobs, which have been sort of very large schemes, 200 odd flats. But so most of our work is residential, and my team and I have been sort of developing ways of managing big projects, which is essentially what I want to try and show you all today. And the tool that we use to do this is groups. So I just need to flick to here. So I don't know how many people here use groups at all to sort of manage their projects at the moment. There's some things you can do with groups which we've kind of worked out ourselves, which as Rob was saying, when I presented this down in London, lots of people were quite surprised that you could do these things with groups. So as a very quick example, I'm sure everyone here would know that if you, just like in pretty much every program you ever use in Windows, whatever, you can group you can group things together, Photoshop and so on. So I've just created a group there, dead quick, easy, and I can then copy that group and create further instance of it like that. Or when you create a group, you'll find down the bottom of your project browser, groups show up under the heading groups, and that's group 1, that's one I've just created. And I can right click on that and I can say create instance. So I can create another one. And as again, one would logically assume, you can right click on a group, you can edit a group, you can change that. So if I delete that wall out of it, finish that, and all instances of the group update. Fairly logical, fairly straightforward. Cool thing you can do with groups is it? I think it's working. One thing you can do with groups is, if you're in your project browser, if you right click on the group, there are various things you can rename it, you can duplicate it. So I could duplicate that, call it, so that's group 2. So that one is still group 1 because I haven't changed it. I can go and change that to group 2. I could then edit that group in the same way I did before, and whatever I do to it. So obviously that one's changed, the other ones haven't, but I could then go and select one of these groups and change it to another group. So that's another instance of group 2. Obviously I could drag it in the same way. Still relatively straightforward things here, but what you can do if you click on edit, it actually opens it rather than selecting it here and saying edit up here. If you right click on the group in the browser and say edit, it asks if you want to open it for editing, and it actually creates essentially another project file with the geometry that you selected in your group. So I could go in here and save the project, and that creates it as a whole new project with just those elements in it. And it's essentially like starting with a completely blank template with those elements in it. It's a bit like W block in AutoCAD, if you remember using that back in the days. And in a similar way, what I'll show you now is, in AutoCAD you could have an AutoCAD file which you could load into AutoCAD as a block. So you can think of it in that sort of way if you've come from an AutoCAD background. So I'm just going to save that group 1 project, which is that group that I created previously. So going back to here, I can now edit that group in here as a separate file, but then I can go model group and I can load it back into the project I was working in, and that will then ask me if I want to replace the existing group 1. So you can see there, that's that one there. So obviously I've edited that outside of the project. So if I go back to there, so in here, as I say, there's very little in that project. I don't know if I turn on. I'm just going to turn on the project base points. You can see, okay, that's the origin of the group. I think that's probably inherited the origin from the file in which it was created. So if I were to move those things so they're closer to the origin, obviously, and then load it back in the same way I did before, then all that geometry in the group in the host project would have moved. So yeah, it's all jumped over there. So as soon as you realise you can edit groups in this way externally, you can basically start a group outside and bring it in, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. So in this host project that I'm just using, this is for demo purposes. It's got a simple grid in it. It's set up so that it's got some party walls, some columns and whatever on a simple grid. I think on the ground floor I've got there's a basement level with some, so it's set up over a parking grid. Dead straightforward. So in this hypothetical building, which doesn't really have any way of getting up into it at the moment, but these would be sized for a typical 1-bed flat. So what we do to populate this with various different flat types throughout the building, we start doing is create those flat types that we load into the project externally rather than within the project. So I'll show you a template for a flat type. Still got it open. So there I have. So here's a flat, and this is not the same size as the one I need in the project yet, but we'll change that in a moment. So this is just a template that we've created, and in a similar way where you have family templates, which have always got predefined parameters, grid lines, things set up, and obviously they're set up to be particular family categories. Essentially, what we're doing here is using model groups or external files in a similar way to a family, but with the power of being able to use system families, walls, floors, ceilings, all those things, and manage it in that way. Also, a fairly recent introduction to Revit is global parameters, which are a very useful tool, and they kind of bring some of the power of family parameters into projects. So this template that we've got set up here, so it's just got grid lines, it's got some area boundaries, it's got an area inserted. If you look at it three-dimensionally, it's just got a floor. That's all it is. It's the footprint of a flat. And in the section, you can see I've got some levels in here set up so you could have you can predetermine your slab levels, your build up and so on within those flats. It's a personal preference of mine is in the main project files where I'm working. I only like to have one level per floor rather than having a structural slab level and a floor level and things, because you end up with walls snapping to the wrong levels. But it's very useful when you're actually trying to model a flat to have elements hosted at different levels. So as I said, so we've got a floor here, and it's hosted to the finished floor, to that level there, top of screed, and there's a separate floor on top of there which is hosted to the finished floor level. These heights strings here, these have been set up as global parameters, so you can quite quickly tailor your flat type to your building. So if you know you've got 3 meter floor to floors, you can quite quickly change the floor to floors in here, and it will reflect into the template. So you could have a global template for a project before you start populating it with your flats. So going back to the main project file, I've got too many windows here open. So I've got the space available for my flat here is 7125 by 7205. That's what I've pre sort of set that up as. So I'm going to go back into my flat template file, and I want to make this that size so it loads in. So I can change that in here. What did I say that was? 7125. No, it wasn't. 7025. Thank you. And the other direction was, no, sorry, 7125 and 7025. So, nope. So that was 7125. Sorry, that was 7025. No, 7205. 7025. Thank you. We'll get there in the end. Right. So that is now the right size for my project. As I said, in here it's very little in the way of geometry, and it's got an area in it. That's all it is. So I'm going to load that into my project. I'll come back to some of those options you have when you load things in a minute. Right. So having loaded that in, it now resides in my project browser down here under groups, and it's just called flat type template because I haven't saved it as anything else. So I'm going to plonk that in there, and you can see there, see, I have a flat, albeit it's empty, that fits in here, and I can then go around and start copying that around. So I can have multiple instances of that flat throughout the project. So in the very early stages of a project where you're just trying to space plan and work things out, you might have some 1-bedroom flats, 2-bedroom flats. You've got some target sizes you want to get them. You can start carving it out for circulation cores and so on. But you might. That's not. No. So at the moment, there we are. So we've got 3 instances of that group in the project. So each one, if I tag area, I should be able to tag each of those 3 areas separately. And you can see that as they come in, it's just giving them slightly random numbers, 93, 94 and 95, as Revit does when you create areas. So you can see it's creating new entities as you bring in those projects in. And if I do the same thing again, I copy that down. Yeah, it's called 96. So fairly obvious, fairly straightforward. Having put those in there, what I can do, if I go back to that template, right, I'm not going to save that, and then here's one I've created earlier, which is a slightly more detailed flat type. So in here I've created some walls, a ceiling, furniture and so on. Now that file is obviously not the same file name, so I can, I'm just going to, just so the naming matches up, I'm just going to copy paste that, go back into my project, and what you can do here, I can rename that group. So now, if I go back to my model group and I load that into my project, because it's got the same name, it will instantly replace all instances of that group with the new flat type. It would ask you, just if you want to do it first, obviously, because you're replacing the geometry. And you can see there instantly you've got flats. I could load in a different flat type. So I've got a, so that's a 1-bed flat type. I've got a 2-bed flat type. One I prepared earlier, I can load that in. And now I can put that in place instead. So I can create one of those. That's going to tell me now. I'll explain why in a minute, but first I'm just going to put that back there. It's come in saying it's some of the elements couldn't be brought in because it didn't bring it at the right level. But now it's fixed that, so that's fixed that. So now I have a 2-bedroom flat. So if I put that one in, it's not quite the right way around because the circulation is caused on the other side. But I can put that in, and that will sit nicely in here. I think if I created this properly in the first place, no, the columns aren't in the right place because that should go to the other end. I think this is one I made that fits in the same column grid. There we are. Okay, so there I could have two bed flats side by side. Mirror that one around there. Put it in the right place. So you can start obviously developing your project further with greater levels of detail, greater different types, different and so on as you go. So that's 2 types. If I wanted to have a type 1A that's slightly different, I can just go in here. I can change that flat type. Let's say it's got the bathroom different way around or whatever it has. I'm not going to brood on that, but I'm going to save that as a 1B. So it's a variation on that flat type, but it's essentially the same. So I can quite quickly create those, if you know there's specific changes, or it might be because your grid structure might mean that you have some units that are very slightly wider, so you can take one that's you've established, you've done a good layout, but it's just slightly different. Load it into here, put it back in there, and then I could select one of these flat types and then change it from a 1A to a 1B, and it will reflect that change. So it's quite a quick way of firstly creating different variations of types, secondly placing them within your project and populating your scheme, and you can then copy them up to different floor tabs. So I could select in here, let's say my floors stack up nice and neatly, select all the model groups. I can then go, you can see they should be, oh no, sorry, do that again. Filter, select all my model groups. I can copy, I can paste, align to selected view, and then that might go up to the second floor. So it should create the same floor plan. Obviously you can stack that all the way up. Why is that not? If I go to the second floor. No. Something's not gone right there. This is the danger of a live presentation. Anyway, you can do it. I assure you can copy the groups up. You can replicate your floor plans, and it might be that the second floor plan might be the same as the first floor plan, but 1 or 2 flats are different. You can just swap them out. So that's all about just modelling the geometry. You may have noticed as I was loading these flat types in, so if I go back to my floor plan there, so as I was loading these flat types in, so I'll go back to that one there. So when I say load as group, it's got some options here. So there's attach details and levels, and include levels and grids. Now I never include the levels and grids, and that allows me to have more levels in my flat types that I can use to snap things up and down to, but without having them come through to the project where they get in the way. But the attached details is very, very useful indeed. So I'll explain what that does. In my template view, I have a working view, which is where I can scribble around, do whatever I like, and then there's 2 or 3 other views in here. So I've got one in here called I've got some plans, dimension plans, and in here we've got a fully dimensioned set of information in there, and it's got rooms, room tags, it's got an area tag, and so on. We also have one that's set up as a sort of more simplified view, developer friendly. It's got metric and imperial dimensions on it. The graphic, it's set to coarse view. and we use that to sort of send out for them to comment on and so on. So if I load that in again, so that attached details, basically what that does is any views you have in your model group that have got detail elements in them, so whether it's line work, filled regions, dimensions, they'll come through as an attached detail group. So you'll see what I mean there. Go back into here. So under your in your project browser, groups are detail groups and model groups. So model groups, obviously, it's three-dimensional geometry. Detail groups are just drafting stuff, and we use those in quite useful ways as well. We use them for sort of grids for sheets and annotations on sheets rather than legends, so we can just paste them across loads of sheets. They're great. But with a model group, you can have an attached detail group. So you can see here. So that one I just loaded in just now was the type 2A, and for each of the views that are in there, there's an attached detail group. So I can select an instance of that flat type, and I can see up here. I can edit the group in place in the project if I want to, rather than go back to the main project file. But obviously, then the two wouldn't be in sync because it's a link. It's loaded in as a group. It's not a link. I'll come to links in a minute. But you can do an attached detail group, and then you can choose one of those detail groups. So I want to add the dimensions to my plan. You do that, and you've got dimensions. Now you can see here, there's a big white splodge over the plan. There's a reason for that. Going back to the group here, these are modelled without. It's only the information that's inside the flat that's modelled. So it's the floors, the wall, the partition walls, the furniture, and so on. But the party walls and the external walls are not modelled because that might vary between instances of the type. And also, if it was bounded on all four sides, you'd have walls on top of each other as you loaded those in. So in order to get these dimension strings to snap to something, what we do, we draw a masking region that is the footprint of the flat, and we dimension to that masking region. We then, in the comments field for that masking region, we just put the word transparent, which I think I've spelt wrong there, and in the view settings we have a filter that sets the transparency of all detail items that have the word transparent in their comments to be 0, to be 100% rather. So it doesn't get in the way of the view. In the project file, that filter's not been applied, so it's white. So we simply have to add that filter to here, which detail item transparent. So if I set that to transparent, then you get that. So you've got your dimensions on the floor plan. And I can do the same thing, so I could select all instances of, no, that's the one I did as a variation. Select all instances of flat type 1, and I can dimension them all straight away. Oh no, I have to load in the one that's got the dimensions on it first. So there, so that would be this one here. So I'm going to go back in there. So I'm going to rename my flat type 1 to the bathroom linked version. I'm going to open that one up. I'm going to load that in to there. Just going to replace that group throughout. It's going to break that because right, so now those ones should all be on the bathroom linked, which they are. So now I can attach detail groups. So I did attach them, didn't I? So they're fully dimensioned straight away because I've loaded that in and it had the dimension information on those views. So it allows you to, obviously quite quickly document your project by dimensioning it once and then just loading it in, and you can do it throughout. And it's also about consistency of placing of room tags and so on, because the rooms and the areas are contained within the model group, as are the tags. So when you load them in, you get they're all in their tags. Yeah.
With the annotation, tagging, dimensioning, that top instance of the group.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah. To be on the opposite side.
Mm-hmm.
So first you've got to see
Yeah.
annotation and so globally, or is it?
Yes.
So do something similar with linked files.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the annotations flip. Yes, that's true. I've had that problem before, and sometimes what I do, I then create a duplicate of the view in the model group, and I reorientate the dimensions in the way that will make it read right. But that is one issue. You'll find if you rotate a group. So I'll take that one over here, so you can see that sort of out the way of the plan. Right, so that's not got the attached group on it. So if I rotate that round and attach the detail group, you'll see, yeah, so things like, you can see there where we've pulled the dimension out of the way of the string. It's not that versus that one. You can see that's been pulled away. So it does do that. That is one issue. But yeah, exactly. But you know what it doesn't, because the text is always readable. So, but it does mean that things don't necessarily end up quite where you want them. Similarly, if I rotated that 90 degrees, some of your tags for your areas might, because they change, or they keep themselves readable, they'll change their orientation. They might not be quite where you want them to be. One way you can get around that is you can set them, if you want it so that their orientation moves with the flat, you can set the orientation of the tag to model rather than horizontal or vertical, and then it will remember what position it's in. But yes, so I say sometimes what I'll do within the model group, if that's causing a problem, I'll have two views that have annotations on them and just modify it as accordingly. So I say these are all groups, so it's not a live link. So if I change the group, and unless I load it in, it doesn't reflect through. But you can have links within groups that then load in, and they become links in the main project. So in this particular project, so this was the first one I showed you, and this has got a sort of simple version of a bathroom, and the kitchen is just modelled as a hob and a sink and a bit of floor. But I'm going to close that and go to the more detailed version that had the dimensions on here. This has got a slightly more detailed version of the bathroom and the kitchen, which you'll see if I set that. So that's got the kitchen, and it's been modelled up with cabinetry and so on. Both of those are linked files that are linked into the group file. And if you look at the managed links, when you link those in, if you link them as an attachment rather than an overlay, then when you load the model group into your main project, the links come with it. So that way you can replace your simplified version of a bathroom with a detailed version of the bathroom, load it in, and because it's a link, everywhere you've got an instance of that group throughout the project, you have the detailed version of the bathroom. You may not want that level of detail in your project, in which case you might prefer to have a simpler version. But it does allow you to load them in, and it will nest. It's a bit like a nested family, which we're going to come on to later, I think. That you can update that throughout. So those are the sort of things you can do in terms of annotations and so on. You can also other elements you can create as groups. So I've showed you the bathrooms and kitchens, but they're in as links. You could do. Here's an example of a balcony. So again, a simple balcony, which you could do as a family, But in this instance, because we you know, it's got a railing, it's got a curtain walling for the glazing, because I quite like modelling it that way. It's got a bit of floor and so on. So all elements you can't have in families. Again, if you look at that in plan, I've got some dimensions in there which are parameterized using the global parameters. So if I go to my global parameters on here, so this particular one, and it's got some formulas in there. So I could say I need a balcony that's 6 square meters to comply with whatever space standard you've got to comply with. So that automatically works out the width and the, you know, for a given depth, it works out the width, and you can see it changes it in here. A bit like a family, but it's a group. The difference between a family and doing it this way, with a family you have your family, you load it in, you can have different types within the family, which can have different parameters. Here it would have to be a different group for each version. But the fact that you can quickly modify it is great. So I've just changed that so it's 6 square meter one. And before I do that, I'll load that in as the 5. So I'm going to stick that in there. So I've got my balcony type 1 in here. And I'll show you another downfall of groups in a minute. So that's my 5 square meter one. I'll go back to that and I'm going to redo that change. I'll save that as a different type. So I'm going to call that 6 meters. I'll put in the proper dimensions if I was doing it properly, but I'm just doing it quickly. So that's got a different name. Model group that in. And I've very quickly got the right balcony size for the 2-bed flat, for example. So that's the 5 square meter one, and that's my 6 square meter one. And the way that's been set up, the curtain wall just kind of stretches itself out and automatically puts in the uprights and the glass and so on. I'll show you a downside of model groups now. Now you see that's got a floor in it that's got indicatively it's timber decking or whatever. If I mirror that, the orientation of the hatch goes horrible. I've not found a way around it, unfortunately. But that can be for one of your sessions of here's a problem, let's try and fix it. Some further down the line. But if you rotate, if you rotate it, it doesn't do that. So I can rotate it as much as I like, and it doesn't screw up the hatches. But as soon as you mirror a model group, they'll go wrong. Which is one of the reasons why I prefer to make bathrooms and kitchens linked in, because when you link it, you can mirror it, you can do whatever you like, and your hatch patterns will stay where they are. So if you're doing tile setting out or whatever in your bathrooms, and that's important to, then it doesn't get messed up. Also, the main benefit between using model groups versus links is that model groups will interact with other elements within your project. So here, so these walls, so there's a bit of wall in the model group that's got the door in it, and I can join that to that, and it automatically cuts out the door, and I can tidy up. And you can see these wall joins, will tidy up. Oops, got multiple on there. So these walls will tidy up and clean up their joins with the walls within the host. Whereas if that was a link, it's inert. It wouldn't do that. Yep.
Is it on in that instance, or when you've joined the wall with the door?
It hasn't. No, so it hasn't. I mean, obviously these are the wrong way around anyway, so they should be. Yeah, but no. So you go down. You'd go around and do that in each instance, and that's going to play funny things there because the walls are different thickness. But yeah. So but say that's the benefit of model groups, that they'll interact in that way. Yeah.
We were just saying, with all the doors being grouped, does that work fine with door schedules and things like that?
Yeah, it does. So, as I was showing, when I first created that first group and I copied it around, you can see that areas all had different numbers. Same thing with groups. That's another thing that I'll have to show you though, is when you create custom parameters, which in this template, so for an area I add in sort of block name, core number, that sort of thing. So they're all in my template already. But if I go to the project parameters that I've set up, so for example core, if I go to modify that, when you set up parameters and they're shared parameters, so that you're using the same parameters between the model groups and the main project file, you can see there's an option here for values being aligned per group type or vary by group instance. So by making sure that it says vary by group instance, you can say different instances of the main model group can have different parameter information, that you can then schedule out. Whereas if you have it the other way around, it's aligned, which can be useful in some ways. So for example, if I go back to the flat type, so this area has some parameter, has the parameters in it. So it's got flat type, and I want the flat type would be something that you would want to be consistent for all instances of that group. So that's set so it doesn't vary by instance. Whereas block name can vary because you might have the same flat type in block A and block B and block C, but you need to be able to input that information so you can get it out in your schedule. So those parameters are set, and similarly the number of beds and the number of persons, again they're custom parameters we put in there, and obviously that flat's not going to vary in its occupancy throughout the project. So those parameters are set so they don't vary between instances. So as I was saying, areas and rooms are created within the group, but then once it's in there, then you're going to want to go around and renumber those. You can, if it's on here, I'll see if I can get it to work, but you can use like the Excitech room numbering tool, and that should, I usually use a different renumbering tool, no offence to Excitech. I use the CTC one, so I'm not so familiar with this one. But yeah, I think in here, so I can go to, how does this work? Rooms, right, pick objects. So, what do? You pick them, don't you? You do it like that. You do, so you can go around, you can pick your rooms. So that's all rooms that are created within that group, and you can get it to do its thing, and it works. So what do I do? I right click? No. What do I do next? Escape. There we are. Right, so there. So then those, I can start there, I can renumber. Now say OK. All numbers need to be defined. No, hang on. I don't use this. How does it work? Run?
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah.
OK.
Yeah, that.
Don't swap. Always swap. OK. Anyway, that's done it. So it does work. So you can populate your floor plan with the groups, chuck it all around, go around, select your areas, renumber them. You can do all that to your heart's content, and you can do that within a schedule. So you could set up a schedule, you can go back into their schedule, and you can start changing that information in there rather than doing it through the excellent plugin that Excitech provide. Oh yes, right. The other benefit of using external files for your flat types is so we also set up a file templates, flat types document template, right. Hopefully this will work. So for coordination with consultants who might not be in Revit, or for sending out drawings to comment, we set up this file here, which, if I just reveal hidden. Okay, so this is a really simple file. It's got a grid structure in it. So grids that go from A to whatever running left to right, and 1 to whatever running top to bottom. So my flat type 1A, I put an instance of it, I put it here, but I link it in. I don't load it as a model group. And 2A would go here, 2B here, and so on. And because they're links, not model groups, it's always live to whatever you've done. So we can open this file, and then there's, for each flat type, we then create a dependent view that just crops it down to that flat type. And there's a tag in there, so that tags the area that's in there, and it gives you basic information about beds, persons, areas, and so on, which is all information that you've input into the model group. From this file, once you've got all your flat types, and there could be 50, or hopefully not too many, depends on how well the project stacks up on, you can very quickly generate a document which you can ping out to your client for commenting. like, here's what I did earlier. So this is an example. So in here, so this is just got, you know, each flat type using the project. We did a little 3D view of them in there as well, and it's very easy for that to, you know, you send that out to the client. They've got an A3 document, it's got all the flat types in it, and they can go through and they can scribble on it to their heart's content in isolation. So it's quite a quick way of kind of doing it that way. And also we can export that out in CAD to, let's say you've got M&E consultants who aren't in Revit and they want to do flat type layouts for their electrical layouts or so on. They can just do that all in one CAD file where they're all laid out nice and neatly. They can work out exactly what's where. You could then quite easily load that back in as a CAD overlay back into your model groups, and it would reflect itself back into your project. So that's kind of model groups. If there's time, I could very quickly show you a project that's got some in it, or that's probably about time, isn't it?
Go on then, quick.
Right, okay.
Can I just ask a good question?
Yes, of course.
Create each model group from, do you just create that using the brand spanking new done project?
No, we've got the templates. So that template I set up in the first place. So that flat type template. So that's got the parameters that we tend to use already set up in it.
To create one,
Yeah.
do you start from project,
New.
template? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you go into your project?
No, I tend well.
Group and then start with that?
No, because if you create a group in your project, export it out, then it's like having a completely blank project, which might be what you want as a starting point. But if you want to sort of predetermine some levels and so on, like we've done here, then it's better to set that up as a new template. Or, you know, obviously, if you want to develop it in house for using it that way. But then, as I go through the project, once I've done one or two flat types in a project, I might start taking one, changing it, saving it as a new one, cleaning it up a bit, and then so creating my suite of files that way, rather than going back to the template each time. Because obviously, there's going to be some similarity. Couple of pitfalls. When you load in a flat type and it's got, let's say you've got wall type 1 and it's in the flat type and it's in the project. They've both got flat type 1, but the flat type 1 that's in the project is different from the model group. It will come in and it will have the properties of the wall type 1 that's in the project, not the one that's in the flat type file. If you have, and that's the case with system files. So obviously, so walls, floors, ceilings, all those things, they will always adopt the properties of the one that's in the host file. If you have door 1 in the project and door 1 in the model group, but they're different, they've been modified in some way before it loads back in, when you load it back in, it will pick up that there's a discrepancy and it will rename door 1 that's in the model group to door 2. So you'll have different. So you have to be careful that you make sure you have the same versions of families loaded into your files. Otherwise, you end up with duplicates of families that are all slightly different. So that's something that's a pitfall. But on balance, although it's some management required as you're loading things in and making sure they're all ready, I think the speed benefits you get out of sort of working this way can reap benefits. So I'll just open one project and you can sort of see an example. Right, well, that loads up. So this I'll just very briefly. So this is a big scheme down in Crawley that we did, and it was for 216 flats, of which there were 30 odd different variations of flat types. By the time we got to the end of it, because of getting things to stack up. But I'll isolate all the model groups and you can see how much of the project is model groups. Yep.
How do you handle wall hosted elements that are hosted to third-party wall?
I avoid them. Yeah.
Like a kitchen wall unit.
Yeah, I don't. I when I first started using Revit, I would use hosted things, and I just found them a pain for that very reason. I mean, even before we developed this way of working with model groups, we would do things like electrical layouts, and you'd have wall hosted electrical layouts, and you want to be able to replicate those up through floors, and instantly you start getting problems where it loses stuff because it's not hosted, even if you're just copying and pasting from one flat to another, which is where we first started kind of realising that I don't like hosted families. So I tend.
Make the families just not hosted then?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to create most of my content from scratch anyway, just because I like doing it. Similarly, so if the thing that that is hosted in it doesn't exist, then it goes. So for that reason, I tend to just use most of my families. I'll start with a generic model. I'll change its category to what I want it to be, rather than start with the templates, or not always, but so yeah, I'll just very quickly show you here. So if I isolate model groups in the filter. You can't isolate it as a category, but you can select them all and do it that way. So if I isolate element, you see how much of this project is model group. So all the flat types. We've got stair cores. So where a stair core stacks up, you can do it once, and then the stairs have disappeared. Balconies, obviously they stack up, so they're something you can duplicate. Other projects where there's there might be an entrance door that's very similar between different units, but it's slightly different. I'll model that as a group, change it a bit, load it into the next one. So you're well to your oyster in so far as how much you can break things down. But it really just helps speed things up, basically, when you're trying to model large schemes.
Do you have any difficulties, like say for instance with the walls that use those levels within the group, when you load them to the project? So that the wall starts snapping to other levels?
No, because it basically will come in. It will associate itself with the nearest level, but it doesn't change in height. So, for example, you can see. So obviously these would have been set up in the same sort of way. So there's sort of sub levels within it. If I pick that wall, that says it's going from 6th floor 0 up to 7th floor. It's got an unconnected height. Yeah. So its height. It might not be how you would model it if you were drawing it in situ, but it doesn't kind of get messed up, if you know what I mean. They don't end up jumping all over the place.
But if you end up needing to edit that level that is in the project model, nudge it a bit, the walls will change, will they not?
Yeah, what this particular project actually, we first set it up with 3 150 floor to floors, and then 3 metre floor to floors, and then they want to go down to 2 850. So when I did that, I went through, crunched the levels down, and all hell broke loose, and it came up with error messages all over the place. But the way to fix that, so if you've got, for example, flat type that stacks up from ground floor all the way up to the 4th floor, and then you change the height of the 4th floor, it will complain that you're changing the group, and it will say, do you want to create? It will say, do you want to break the group apart or fix groups? When it says fix groups, it gives you 2 options. It allows you to basically sort of explode the groups or create new group types. So if you create new group types, then it just appends a number on the end of it. Basically, let it do that. Then, once you've got all your levels down where you need them to be, you go back to your model group, you set that to the right height, load it in, then select all of those and put them back on the right model type. So it might mean that it takes a bit longer to crunch your building down, but you can do it. And so it might mean that you have to spend a couple of hours just going through and fixing it all. But you can manage that process. I had to do exactly that on this project because they crunched down all the floors. It was a bit of a pain, but it worked. But again, it managed to do the whole process in a few hours, which is not too bad.
So we're just running a little over time. So we've got a couple more quick questions, and then we'll have to catch Tim in the break. Otherwise,
as I mentioned before, I've done something very similar, but using linked files rather than groups.
Yeah.
Have you gone down that route and found that there's some reason why groups are better than linked files?
Predominantly because of the fact that the linked elements in the linked file don't interact with the model, so you can't join walls together. So it's so wall joins is the main thing. And also, if you had multiple instances of the file linked in, then all the rooms that are in that link would have the same properties. You can't vary the parameters of those rooms between links, but you can do it between groups. So you can have multiple instances, and you go around and do the renumbering thing, which you wouldn't be able to do in a link. Yeah.
How do you find that affects the performance of the model? I mean, that's obviously a very big project.
Yeah.
File size reduced by having lots of
I don't think it reduces it. I mean, so people asked a similar question when I did this down in London, and they all said, "Oh, but models groups make your files massive and they make it really difficult to work on." And I've not really found that performance is hit but in terms of Revit, but I think the productivity has massively increased, and it sort of outweighs it. I mean, this project, as I say, is quite a large project. It's a planning stage, so it's not that detailed a model, but it's it's reasonably detailed. You can see there, and that's 220 meg for a quite a big resi scheme with 220 flats, so it's not that bad. Yeah. Well, on the very big, the other big scheme that we've done, let's say it's on site now. So that's 4 blocks. So each block we've done as a separate file and linked it into the master file. But that has its own problems in its, because then you have to go into that file and then into that file and into that file to change that thing and then load it all back in again, and then you do your annotations and stuff in the main project. In a similar way with where you can do the detail groups that link to the model groups and do the annotations that way, you can link through. I don't know if any of you've done this. When you link a file into Revit, you can then get the annotations from that linked file into your main project, and by in the visibility settings. So you can do some of the same sort of things with links, but it's the way it interacts is different.
Thanks very much, Tim.